Yeah, we back. Now today, we got a special one. Today, we are going to discuss the 10 lessons that black men can learn from the life of King Henri Christophe. Let's get into it. Now, I know I said 10, but scratch that. It might be 11 lessons. Now, as you know, last week I wrapped up an 8-part series in which I discussed and I documented the reign of King Henri Christophe, Commander-in-Chief of Northern Haiti from 1802 to 1820 until his death. As we know, King Henri Christophe, the wealthiest black man of the 1800s and potentially also the 1900s as well, the most powerful black man of the 1800s and maybe the 1900s as well. If you didn't watch that series, go to my channel, go in my playlist section. It's in a playlist called The Most Powerful Black Man of the Last 500 Years, King Henri Christophe, 1767 to 1820. Go watch that, check it out. Crazy content. I think every black man, regardless of his background, regardless of his life story, will enjoy that and will be able to take something from that and apply it to his personal situation and his own life. But back to the subject at hand, the 11 lessons that black men can learn from the life of King Henri Christophe. Number 1, I gotta put this at the top. The first lesson is pay your dues. As we know, Christophe was born into slavery, and the first 12 years of his life was straight up in service to plantation labor, to helping the British Empire get richer. Now, unfortunately, that's not paying dues, but that's a part of life. Listen, he spent his teenage years as a servant of a French naval officer during the American Revolution, then spent his late teens and early 20s washing dishes, waiting tables at a hotel in Northern Haiti. Then spent his 20s and 30s in military service directly under the command of General Toussaint Louverture, and finally became a head of state around the age of 40 after paying his dues as a worker and a student and a general for 4 decades, fighting against 4 armies, risking his life and getting shot on multiple occasions. Christophe, like most men in the modern day, reached his peak around his 40s and his 50s. That's when he reached his peak and his pinnacle of power, wealth, greatness, and status in society. That is also typically the age where men reach the pinnacle of their success in modern society as well. As we know, we got to go through the motions, going to school, getting our degrees, getting our credentials, or whatever path you may choose. Even if you're an athlete, rapper, entertainer, businessman, you got to go through those growing pains. You know, when you broke, struggling, grinding, getting to it, you know what I mean? Staying patient. You have to go through that, bro. And Christophe spent the first 40 years of his life in service to somebody else. Maybe the plantation labor does not count, but in terms of being a servant of a French naval officer, going to the American Revolution, getting that experience as a teenager, coming back, waiting tables, having a regular job, kind of like we do here. Christophe back in those days came from an elite social class, a social background where he had opportunities to gain his freedom at an early age. He even bought the freedom of his sisters when he was in his early 20s, right? So listen, Christophe's life was not really too different than many of us today, obviously, minus the plantation labor for the first 12 years of his life. The second lesson that black men can learn from Christophe: having a mentor. Not only a mentor, but a mentor that is a master in his craft. As we know, there are a lot of old heads, a lot of old dudes. Just because they live to see the age of 66 does not mean that they're qualified to be your mentor and lead you to where you got to go. You feel me? And in my opinion, it would not have been possible for Christophe to reach the level of wealth, power, and success that he reached without being under the tutelage, under the command, under the instruction of Toussaint Louverture, one of the greatest political minds that the black race has ever produced. I mean, imagine being a young 25, 26, 27-year-old brother under the command of that type of man, under the command of that type of general. In my opinion, I do rank Christophe as the greatest black leader of the Western Hemisphere, period. But that wouldn't be possible if he wasn't the student of one of the greatest minds that the black race has ever produced. He comes from that branch of Toussaint Louverture. The government of Dessalines and Christophe was modeled after the colonial administrative government of Toussaint Louverture. You can't praise Christophe without praising Toussaint Louverture. You can't even praise Dessalines without praising Toussaint Louverture. You have to understand, Toussaint was an old head. He was in his 50s, in his 60s. Dessalines and Christophe, they were in their 20s and their 30s. And it's something to be said how men like Dessalines and Christophe were described to be men who demanded obedience to their will, but at the same time, Toussaint Louverture was able to have these men under him and respect him as the old head, respect him as the elder, and answer to him. So there's something to be said about having a mentor to guide you on your path. Christophe had the blessing of being a student of Toussaint Louverture for a period of 11 years, from the ages of 24 and 35, as he rose up the ranks of the Haitian military. The value of an elder military chief like Toussaint, who took Christophe under his wing and elected Christophe to a position of leadership as commanding general of Northern Haiti at the age of 34. Christophe remained loyal to Toussaint, even in the face of French invasion. Y'all remember when Christophe refused to grant permission for the French warship fleet to land in the harbor that he controlled unless Toussaint granted his authorization? Toussaint was known for his extreme levels of structure and discipline. which for those of you who watched my series last week on Christophe, you understand Christophe definitely inherited those traits from Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint was known to sleep very little and eat very little, and also lead his troops into battle on the front line. Those many years of being a good student under the command of Toussaint proved to be valuable when Christophe rose to his own position of power later down the line. The third lesson black men can take: be willing to go just as hard or harder than your opponent. Y'all remember when the French invaded in 1802 and landed in the port city that Christophe was controlling? Remember, Christophe was 34 years old at the time, and he gave orders for the entire city to be burned down and escape with his army into the mountains, taking all white residents of the town as hostages. As we know, Napoleon gave instructions to wage a war of extermination, meaning that everybody above the age of 6 had to be assassinated. So Christophe was like, bet, we're taking the whole French population as hostages up in the mountains. If that's how it's going to be, bet. You got to be willing to go as hard as your opponent. You got to be willing to go as low as your opponent. You have to be as demonic as your opponent, because power only respects power. Strength only respects strength. You cannot respond to evil acts with acts of kindness. You must respond to evil acts with more demonic acts. You must put the fear of God into your opponent, even if you don't even believe in God. You must put the fear of whatever deity you believe in into the veins of your opponent, period. And wherever the Europeans were willing to go, Christophe was willing to meet them on that same field, on that same ground. Wasn't no marching, no peaceful protesting. You taking mine, I'm taking yours. You violate mine, I'm violating yours. You take one of mine, I'm taking 3 of yours, period, point blank. Y'all remember during the series, we spoke about the many military operations launched by Christophe to rescue enslaved Africans from European slave ships that swam near his shores, that swam near his harbors. Christophe put warships in the sea and captured those ships. Christophe understood that money and violence are the only two things that are respected in this world and can be used as vehicles to enact tangible change, whether political or economic. Period, point blank. Christophe knew, if I want to impose my will on the world, if I want to impose my will on society, I'm going to need the money to do it, and I'm going to need the strength to do it. And strength, you can define that any way you want. Let's get into it. The next lesson, number 4. Christophe understood that money controls politics, and he spent millions of dollars donating to British abolition groups as a major philanthropist, and formed economic alliances with the British government and many of the abolitionists in England, and made friends with many British elites, while at the same time launching military operations to rescue enslaved Africans. So on both fronts, Christophe was using his money to influence policy in Europe to help black people around the world, and he was mobilizing his military on the high seas to capture European slave vessels and rescue those on board and give them Haitian citizenship and imprison the slave captains of the ship. So Christophe was working on both fronts, money and violence, money and strength, money and force. That is how things get done in the modern world, and Christophe understood that in the early 1800s. But like I said, he understood that because he had a mentor that understood that. The great, the legendary, the illustrious, the honorable Toussaint Louverture. Lesson number 5. Christophe understood that you got to put money away for your family in case of an emergency. Y'all remember when Christophe died? Y'all remember when Christophe took his own life and the kingdom was overthrown? The kingdom fell. According to the history books, before Christophe took his own life, he had a small conversation with his wife, with his daughters, and then shortly after went into his private quarters, shot himself, bang, right? It says, as the history goes, months later down the line, Christophe's wife and his daughters were able to escape the island with $3 million in 1820. Now, that in the modern equivalent, that is close to $80 million. So Christophe understood that, listen, at the end of the day, my family gonna be straight. Whether I'm here, whether I'm gone, I already got things set up to where my family gonna be straight. And y'all remember back then, Haiti was split into two governments, and at the time of Christophe's death, the generals from the Southern Mulatto Republic came into his territory, invaded his territory, and incorporated the northern section of Haiti, which was Christophe's territory, into the Republic of Haiti, which is the country that they controlled, which is now the modern Republic of Haiti. They went into the palace, they went into the citadel. In the palace, they said they found $250,000, somewhere around about. Convert that to the modern equivalent, that's over $6 million. They went into the citadel, they found $40 million. According to the modern equivalent, that is somewhere around $10 billion. As we know, the Southern Mulatto generals appropriated those funds into their treasury, and they did nothing with anything that Christophe built or left behind. They let everything fall into the ruins. That was supposed to be the inheritance that Christophe left for the country. And unfortunately, when his rivals took over his territory, they abolished everything that he established. But like I said, keep money away for an emergency. Due to the fact that Christophe kept money away for an emergency, and his wife and his daughters were able to get their hands on close to $100 million, especially after they sold all their belongings and their jewelry and they settled outside the country in England and Italy. They were able to live a life of extreme luxury, a life of an elite level, even though their father was gone, even though the husband was gone. It was said that Queen Maria Luisa Quavidad, she never even remarried. And I don't blame her, because I mean, what man could really measure up, especially once you already got, millions on millions you playing with, you stacking with. So it is what it is. Keep money away for your family in case of an emergency. Next lesson. Number 6, never sell out. Just like when Christophe remained loyal to Toussaint when the French expedition landed in the harbor, he showed the same level of honor and patriotism when the French government sent an ambassador to his territory in 1814 to negotiate a treaty where Christophe would be forced to pay tribute to France. Christophe had that French ambassador sent to prison and executed. Christophe valued his honor and respect more than he valued his own life or his own personal wealth, which was a major source of his patriotism and his uncompromising attitude. Even when the French government assassinated his firstborn son in 1805, Christophe was never shaken on his mission. He continued to elevate up the ranks of power and wealth when most men would have broken down and negotiated a personal deal with the enemy instead of remaining focused on the bigger picture. You got to embrace everything you sign up for, especially when you're aiming for the highest levels of power like Christophe. Once you gunning and going up against world powers like the French Empire, the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, you got to understand that's what comes with it. Christophe's firstborn son in 1805 was assassinated by the French government. Yes, look that up. I believe the young boy's name was France Ferdinand Christophe or something like that. He was born in the year 1794, I believe, and they took his life around 1805. Now, that never broke Christophe's spirit, even after going through all those many wars. Imagine all the fellow soldiers and comrades that died in arms, and even his own child losing his own firstborn son, the heir to the throne. After 1805, Christophe continued to elevate in wealth, power, status, and success, period. Next lesson, number 7. In order to reach the height of power, sometimes you must be willing to step on toes and crack heads. What do I mean by that? Okay, according to the history books, Christophe is connected, whether directly or indirectly, to the assassinations of at least 4 other high-ranking members of the Haitian Revolutionary Army. Those being General François Capois, General Augustin Clervaux, General Jean-Baptiste Sans-Souci, and General Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Now, of these 4 assassinations, Christophe gave the direct order to have Capois, Clervaux, and Jean-Baptiste Sans-Souci assassinated. In the case of Dessalines, Christophe is named as a conspirator because he had knowledge of the operations, not because he gave direct orders. He was not there during the occasion. He did not pull no trigger, but because he had the inside knowledge that an operation was brewing and he did not give the word to Dessalines, his name has come up as one of the conspirators. But as we know, the true masterminds of that operation that ended in the assassination of Jean-Jacques Dessalines was General Alexander Pétion, mulatto leader, General Nicolas Geffroy, mulatto leader, who ended up dying before Dessalines died. In fact, Dessalines threw a party when General Nicolas Geffroy died because they were beefing at the time, and Dessalines knew that Nicolas Geffroy was on his head. So when he died, Dessalines threw a celebration. Now, the reason why Christophe had General François Capois assassinated, in my opinion, is that General François Capois was heavily loyal to Dessalines. In fact, I believe after Dessalines died, I believe General François Capois was going around trying to get revenge, trying to get back for Dessalines, trying to avenge the memory of Dessalines. And potentially, General François Capois probably would have assassinated Christophe and everybody else involved. Unfortunately, Christophe got the jump on him, got the one up on him, and he had him deleted before he could even reach him. Why did he have Jean-Baptiste Sans-Souci assassinated? In fact, as we know, the palace that Christophe lived in as his main residence, that crazy palace that looked like the Palace of Versailles in France, he named it the Sans-Souci Palace. So he named it after somebody that he had assassinated. But listen, Christophe a gangster. But why did he have him assassinated? Jean-Baptiste Sans-Souci was an African-born general, a military veteran from Africa who landed in Haiti, and he was one of the main generals in the northern province, in the northern territory, had a lot of power, especially up in the mountains with the other African-born slaves, with the other African-born rebels. The beef between Christophe and Sans-Souci was basically a beef between 2 men from different walks of life. Christophe came from that free black affranchi class, you know what I mean? He was gone from the plantation by the time he was 12 years old. He had a job, he had a family, he had money, he had a wife, he had a property. He was a bit elite, you know what I'm saying? Whereas Jean-Baptiste Sans-Souci, he came from the bottom, he came from the gutter, you know what I'm saying? He was a plantation slave up until 1791. He was African born. During that time, there was some friction between the African born blacks and the plantation-born blacks, because it was a different culture, different upbringing. You got those coming from Africa that know about their homeland, that know where they came from, that knew they come from a free society, and now they were forced into slavery. And then you got those that were born in the plantation. They're not really too familiar with what's going on back in Africa. So there was these differences between the two, especially between someone like Christophe, who was a free black before the revolution popped off, and Sans Souci, who was still enslaved on the plantation when the revolution broke out. So these were two men from different walks of life, different statuses and classes in society. And Sans Souci did not want to answer to Christophe for the reasons I mentioned before. And like I said, Christophe had experience fighting in the American Revolution and fighting in the French army against the British and the Spanish. So Sans Souci, he did not want to answer to nobody who ever pledged allegiance to the French flag, served in the French military. He looked down on Christophe. One, he was a younger dude, so he's like, I'm not going to answer to nobody younger than me. And you served in the French army. So in Sans Souci's mind, he was like, I'm not like you. I never served for no European flag. I never served for no European army. I'm from Africa. The only militaries I served was from my homeland back home and when I'm fighting these Europeans in the mountains. So Sans Souci, he did not want to answer to Christophe. So Christophe, to solidify the power in the north, because these were two influential men in the northern province, Christophe had Sans Souci wiped out, eradicated, assassinated around 1802. Why did Christophe have Augustin Clervaux assassinated? As we know, Clervaux, big mulatto general, but he was one of the mulattoes that rode with the blacks from day one. He was loyal to Toussaint until day one, until the day he died. So he was a mulatto that looked at himself as a black man, right? He also held power, influence in the northern province. But in 1804, they said he died from yellow fever. There's another theory that goes that Christophe had a doctor sent to Clervaux when he was sick, who pretty much finished him off. And in my opinion, I believe that was done to solidify his power in the north. There were many influential rebel leaders holding power and influence in the northern province of Haiti during that time. And Christophe, the young boy, he was younger than all of them, to solidify his power and influence in the north, which would help him go on to establish his own kingdom in the north later down the line. He had some people wiped out, moved aside, pushed to the side. And listen, in order to rise to the highest levels of power, just look through the history books. Sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. I'm not saying what Christophe did was wrong or right. I condemn it. But I'm saying black men in life, in order to achieve the highest levels of power, especially when you're talking about someone who rose to the level of power like Christophe, a head of state, multi-billionaire in the early 1800s during the height of slavery, yeah, you're going to have to step on some toes. You're going to have to crack some heads, even in the modern day. Yes, indeed. Next lesson, number 8. Christophe understood the importance of agriculture. Unlike black leaders today, who pretty much have their countries dependent on foreign imports from America, who get subsidized by the American government, the U.S. farmers getting rich. Meanwhile, the people back in Africa and in black nations around the world are not self-sufficient like we were centuries ago. Christophe understood the importance of agriculture, and under his government, he put every acre of fertile land under cultivation, establishing a self-sufficient system where the nation was able to feed itself without being dependent on foreign imports, while also producing a surplus, which allowed him to establish a profitable commerce with multiple trading nations, Great Britain in particular, which put billions of dollars in the pockets of Christophe's government. Lesson number 9. Christophe understood that black people, especially coming out of slavery in the early 1800s, and in my opinion today as well, are not built for democracy in our current state. Why do I say that? When you've been brainwashed by the media, when you've been brainwashed in the classroom, you're not in any position to participate in a democratic system. You must be guided and instructed by those who know better. Democracy is for those with high amounts of knowledge, high amounts of intelligence, and people who are living a high quality of life so they cannot be easily bribed and bought off and won over. In the present day, black people, we do not know our history. We do not know where we've been. We do not know where we're going. We do not know where we at. So how can we effectively participate in a democratic system and have our voices be heard if we don't know where we at, we don't know who we are, we don't know what we're trying to do? Listen, Christophe understood that a group of people coming from under the chains of European chattel slavery must be placed under a monarch-type government where there is order and structure and a clear road for building the country, where there are directions and instructions clearly given out. Democracy can be introduced after prosperity is established and a generation of well-educated and well-adjusted citizens are raised up. During the years of growth for a country, an iron fist rulership must be established to carry out the socio-economic plans of the nation. America, the most powerful nation on the world currently in 2022, also built her wealth in a similar fashion. And then later down the line, introduced democracy and extra freedoms and different amendments after multiple trillions of dollars were generated for the U.S. government and their power and prosperity was effectively secured. But during those years of growth, it was iron fist rulership. And you can look at all the other powers, the French, the British, the Spanish, they all went through that same period of growth and growing pains where it wasn't just freedom and democracy. No, it was, listen, we're doing this and this is what we're doing, period. Anybody go against the code, you're going to get punished because we're trying to build a nation. We're trying to establish power. So that's how it goes. Christophe required all citizens of his territory to be active in at least one sector that actively contributed to the security or the economy of the nation. You either had to be a cultivator of the land, producing food and products that will feed the nation or enrich the nation through commerce and trade. You had to be a military man, contributing to the security and protection of the land and the seas, or you had to be a young student getting your education in school. The three main sectors were agriculture, military, and education. It was not optional. You had to choose one or you would be sent to jail because being a vagrant or unproductive vagabond was punishable by law within Christophe's territory and seen as an act of treason against the state. Number 10, Christophe was the ultimate black man. Listen, rich, powerful, fearless, well-dressed, well-spoken, intelligent, but still willing to take up arms and fight for what he believes in, debunking the narrative that black men either fall into one or two categories. Either you're the black nerd or you're the black thug, or you know what I mean? It's only these binary options, but Christophe was the whole package, man. A true example of a black Renaissance man. And that is who we should desire to be as black men, Renaissance men. Men who are knowledgeable and effective in many areas of life. Unlike today, where we divide black men in different subgroups, Christophe occupied multiple spaces. The warrior, the student, the leader, the intellectual, the fashion king, the gangster, the husband, the father, the brother. Christophe became the patriarch of his family, had his first child, and purchased his sister's freedom from slavery in his early 20s, and had her transported from the island where she was enslaved and brought her to Haiti, where she settled and married and became a princess in his royal court when he established his own government. Number 11. The final lesson that black man can learn from the life of King Henri Christophe. Christophe saw the bigger picture. Even though Christophe came from a privileged social class, when the revolution broke out, he still decided to take up arms with the rebel slaves in the mountains. Even though he had a wife, he had a kid, he had jobs, he had everything going on, he had money in his pocket. He was a privileged black man for his era, but he understood the bigger picture. He could have easily hopped on a boat to Louisiana and escaped the instability of the war, but he understood the bigger picture and was able to see beyond himself and sacrifice himself for the generations that would come after. And he was able to come to this level of comprehension in his early 20s. As we know, he joined the Haitian Revolutionary Army at the age of 24, when he was already married, when he already had a kid, when he already had money in his pocket, when he already had a job, when he already had his own business. That is when he decided to leave everything behind and risk everything and join the Haitian Military Army. And as we can see, the decision paid off because he ended up becoming king of Northern Haiti, his stomping grounds, and ended up becoming the most powerful and wealthy black man of the century in which he died. So not only should the lesson be, look at the bigger picture, look at the future, look at the generations coming after, but also be willing to take risks and be willing to risk your life, because guess what? It might just pay off in ways that you'll never imagine. Also remember, later down the line, in 1816, when the French attempted to negotiate a treaty with Christophe, he demanded that the terms of the treaty also include the recognition of the southern mulatto territory controlled by his rival, his arch enemy, General Alexander Pétion, because he wouldn't allow the French to play games of divide and conquer between the two rival leaders. Even though Pétion was his enemy, he still viewed him as a brother and a fellow compatriot. When he entered into negotiations with Europeans, he understood the bigger picture. He understood, listen, at the end of the day, whatever me and my brother got going on, that's family business. And when it comes to me going into negotiations with the enemy, I got to have my brother's back, regardless of what's going on back home. You dig? So listen, it's your boy Henri Dessalines back in the building. Yes, indeed. The 11 lessons that black men can learn from the life of the honorable, the illustrious, the general, the king, Henri Christophe, the most powerful black man of the last 500 years. One of the greatest black leaders to ever touch the earth. And I'm gone. Peace.
Reincarnated, I'm back in original fashion. I left on a horse and came back in that ass, and I left with abundance and came back to famine. We used to be pyramids, now we be rapping. Look how the mighty have fallen. Used to be running, now we be walking. When you be cooning, that's when they applauded. Selling your soul, your sons and your daughter. Gotta come up in this shit, they stuck in the mix. Really, my heart it be breaking. That's why I'm stacking that paper and handle my business. Pass it down in generation. Talking about money and power and building a nation. That's the deadly combination. Never be watching the TV, they pushing agendas, falsifying information. Know they got malice intentions. Step in the room and I'm feeling the tension. Enemy watching, he blocking my vision. Pay for the check cause I need my redemption. Building my kingdom, I need it protected. Ready for war like a young Money Congo. Never decided the team is the motto. Up in the crib and I'm whipping up waffles. Up in the crib and I'm smoking gelato. I'm chilling, I'm taking my pain and make it ambition. I'm blessed by the gods, but I ain't religious. I came for the power, they came for the bitch. They making no hourly wage, I got business. This is an art, and they can never be taught. Selling my soul, I can never be bought. Play with my money, I see you ain't caught. Run to the check and I do it for sport. Babylon falling, I go to the source. Packing my luggage and go overseas. Shorty be with me and she so elite. Shorty be chocolate, I'm calling her Hershey. Secret intelligence probably gon' murk me. Don't fuck with brands, cause nigga I'm Haitian. Say the wrong shit and get smack in their faces.